This, of course, is called Transfiguration Sunday. You're familiar with that word? All right. What's so interesting about that, when Jesus was transfigured, you know what really happened? We saw Jesus as he was in heaven, his heavenly body. That's pretty special, wouldn't you say? All right. I got to be a little academic with you so that we can catch up with where we are in this story. The reading about Abraham tells us that Abraham waited, so long for his son to come. He was old as well as his wife, and they finally had the son that he wanted so that his family could grow and the nation could grow. Then God asked him to sacrifice this son, and Abraham did it. Abraham is referred to as the father of faith. You ever hear that phrase before? So, dearest family, the point of this is, when we struggle with our faith, because sometimes in situations we're not quite sure where we are, sometimes we get confused, call upon old Abraham and say, Father Abraham, help me with my belief. Help me to get rid of my unbelief. Important. Can you remember that? So when you struggle with your faith, remember Abraham. God had asked him to give up his son, and he said yes. And not begrudgingly, he simply said yes. But then he was given back his son, and he didn't have to sacrifice him. Does this story sound a little familiar to you? What this is a preparation for, and this is why we get academic for a while, that situation is not unlike when the Father sent his Son, who is Jesus, who then would die for us. Do you see the connection? So in the Old Testament, the readings and everything points towards moving towards the Messiah coming. But in this case, it tells us that Jesus would come and that they would know the story. But when Jesus came, and that's why it said the rising from the dead, that his son would actually die for the sake of us. So we need to be able to keep that in mind. The next point. The disciples are there with Jesus, and we have the transfiguration. And what does it say? It says that Peter, together with James and John, are terrified. So Peter doesn't know what to do in that situation. And frankly, you or I too wouldn't know what to do. We see this person we've been with transfigured. He's in his heavenly body, and we say, whoa, this is really something. So Peter said the same thing, and then he doesn't know what to do. And this shows you that Peter's not the sharpest knife in the drawer here. He says, shall we build a tent? He doesn't know what to do, so he said, I got to say something. And that's the thing that Peter would struggle with from time to time. He would just have to say something. So the Lord listens to what he has to say. But this is in preparation for what comes next. Excuse me a minute. Then this cloud, they hear this voice. And the voice says, believe in my son. This is another confirmation about who Jesus is. Now let's look back. The story of the apostles is that Andrew, Peter's brother, first met Jesus. And he comes to Peter and says, I've seen the Messiah. So we hear this phrase, this is the Messiah. Peter then is introduced at one point to this Jesus, and then Jesus asks him, who do people say that I am? And he says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Then at the time of the transfiguration, the Father says, this is my Son, believe in him. So that's a confirmation all the way along the way that Jesus is who he says he is. Why is this important? It's important because in the situation in which the disciples lived and the apostles, there were lots of things going on. For one thing, you know the Romans are there, and they have conquered this country, so the agenda of that country was Roman. Do you understand what I'm saying here? The next point is they have their own religious faith, which is the Jewish faith, which they're trying to follow, but with difficulty. Also, other people would appear at certain times and say they were the Messiah. But here we have the confirmation at least 3 times, this is my Son, believe in him. And those particular phrases were not only meant for them, but for us who would follow after it, that what we believe is true, it is right, it is just, and all of it's to our benefit. Are you clear with me now about this? These 3 times is confirming for each one of us that Jesus is who he says he is. And that becomes more important because, as I've said so often with you, those apostles, those disciples are not here. You and I are here. So we represent those words, just like the apostles and the disciples did. And we have these 3 stories among others, which help us to know with confidence that this Jesus is real and that he had only one purpose in coming to this place, and that is to lift us up because we were struggling with sin. And he says, I'll help you lift yourself up. I'll help you do that by giving you this process. And it's the one I've been sharing with you for months. You share in this process when you commit yourself to doing one loving act after another. There's 2 kinds of theology about this, Jesus coming. And the big one is, save us from our sins. You know that phrase? Save us from our sins. But I believe that that's secondary. The first reason Jesus came is because he loved us. Then he helped save us from our sins. That's a different way to think about this. So the first approach to us is because we're loved. Then the fact that some of our life has to be repaired. When we are aware of that, then we know how to deal with the sinfulness that comes into our life. And I also, as I go over and over this thing, when we commit ourselves to doing one loving act after another, we push sin away, and there's less room in our life for sin because we've committed ourselves to doing loving things. And also I shared with you, most of our life is small little incidents, and then we have some big things that happen in our life, like graduating from college, getting married, having grandchildren, and all the good things that come. But basically, our life is made up of little acts, little happenings. And when we commit ourselves to be people who have been raised up by God, what a difference we can make in the world in which we live. One loving act at a time.